to another question, because we've talked about the militant history of the working class in Nigeria, and how a capitalist elite have cornered the wealth of the country and essentially using state power to their own benefits. So what has changed about the trade union and the unions in general that has made them kind of weak against the effects of this capitalist domination and the beating back of their labor gains by capital, essentially?
A lot. A lot can be attributed to the international environment generally that has become more hostile to progressive left-wing forces. I'm sure we're all familiar with the story of the fall of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, and the emergence of a unipolar capitalist order. That historical event actually signifies a standpoint in the decline of the international trade union movement, not just Nigeria. The Soviet Union, with all the limitations, and there were many limitations, as the first socialist states, and what was called actually existing socialism that it represented, offered a lot of inspiration. People were inspired by the way the Soviet Union was able to rapidly overcome poverty, was able to resist imperialist aggression, was able to even withstand Hitler's invasion in the Second World War and beat back that fascist aggression and liberate even the larger chunk of Europe from. So people were inspired by all of that. The country that was almost at zero level had become a world power within a few decades, because it was able to build, it was able to mobilize internal resources, was able to mobilize people to work, to transform the system of production, industrialize the economy, and was in a position to successfully challenge the world power of the time, Hitler's fascist government. So that was a source of inspiration, and of course it also rendered a lot of assistance to progressive organizations and movements all over the world, including Nigeria. So when that collapsed in the Soviet Army in 1989, it had a lot of, it was a moral dampener. Some of the material support ceased. A lot of young people that used to go to the Eastern Bloc for studies and all of that, all of those opportunities dried up. And so the only way to look was westwards. And they became so confident that less than a decade after, a political philosopher could come out to say history had ended. There was no more to history, because the Soviet Union had collapsed and capitalism had emerged. Which demonstrated the triumphal mood of the times, and the obvious pulverization of progressive movements all over the world, including, of course, the trade unions. That's one factor. And deriving from that also is the fact that a lot of young people that used to derive a lot of information and inspiration, and as I said, knowledge is power. A whole generation of people that used to at least have access to alternative viewpoints, alternative ideological viewpoints, discovered that there was nothing anymore, So people had to synchronize with the only thing that was available. So a lot of people became socialized into the dominant view, the dominant ideological. So that had enormous impact on culture and social life. So it means trade unionism was even no longer appealing to young people. People who want to even pursue, few young people who even want to pursue a career in trade unionism, unlike in the past when progressive-minded young people saw trade union as their next point of call after college education. You naturally graduate into, and it was a life of struggle and sacrifice, but that's what you want to do anyway. But now all of that became unfashionable, and so we now had incursion of what I call alien forces, alien elements into the trade union movement. People went into the movement just because there was no other job. It became the last point of call. So after you have searched for a job everywhere else that was known, and you have a brother that works in a trade union, I said, oh yeah, come and manage this one. So you enter the trade union movement not out of any form of ideological consciousness or commitment, unlike what we used to have in the past. And so the whole place became populated by people I call absolute opportunists who have no idea of what the movement is about, and who don't even bother to probe into the rich history of the movement in terms of defending working people and at least always winning something back for working people. So you have that subjective element. People who are not even conscious of their class responsibility as trade unionists, populating the whole ecosystem. So that's also a major problem. Perhaps also is the fact that the political climate also, which is completely dominated by bourgeois elite. We have all the dominant parties are led by bourgeois elite interest, and so what's on offer at any point in time always views and standpoints that are extremely reactionary. And you can also talk to even the cultural climate. You tune on your television set, you want to listen to your radio or whatever, and the only thing you can hear is government has no business with business. Everything has to be privatized. Corruption can only be defeated if we hand over everything to the private sector. That's the only way to deal with corruption. All of us should become entrepreneurs, and the colleges also encourage that. You must, everybody, whatever, irrespective of what you are studying, you must take a course in entrepreneurship. How to be good entrepreneurs, how to be so the entire cultural climate, the socialization system, the education system, condition people, especially young people, to think only in one direction, and to be very uncritical of the system under which they have found themselves. So I think all of these have actually weighed down on the movement.
So we've been talking about how the elites have dominated the whole of society, and even our political spectrum is still within the boundaries of what they want and how we run our economy and what the role of the government is in economic life. Now we have to look at the current phenomena and the life of the working class in terms of what they are facing, be it casualization of their work or what we call contract staff and all these things. A lot of people talk about, a lot of people still don't know what the effects of capitalism is in the country, and maybe it would be nice for them to understand that the effect of capitalism and how capital always wants to dominate labor is leading to this throwing the working class under the bus. And also maybe you can throw a little bit of light on this issue, like the fate of the working class, how it has become so miserable over the years now. Can you fleshing it up for us to let us know in our society the dimensions of how capital is dominating labor and how it is making a mess of the gains that labor has made over the years?
Yeah, thank you. Like I said earlier, part of the fallout or the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Soviet bloc, and the rise of triumphal capitalism, and the emergence of what is now known as neoliberal capitalism with the Clinton administration in the 90s, has had enormous impact on all aspects of socio-economic and political life globally, because sometimes it's useful to move to look at the global picture, which provide a general environment for what we are also having locally in Nigeria. So you have a system that proclaims that the only logic that can drive development and society is the quest for profit, the animal instinct, the greedy instinct to accumulate. It is called neoliberal because it's actually falling back to Adam Smith, the father of laissez-faire capitalism, who actually says, and what he said became the doctrine of capitalist expansion and development. You are made to make profit. The desire, the quest for profit is what drives competition, and it's only competition that drives development. And we all know what came out of that. I mean, it partly explains the global mercantilism, which is also linked to the slave trade. Because people wanted money anyway. There is no morality to it, and all of that. And of course, we also know the story of how people of conscience or whatever hue or cry or ideological conviction, how to fight that, look, this can't be correct, this can't be right, that everybody should just live for the profit and greed of a few people. And so there were always fightbacks. And of course, the Marxism itself and socialist ideas emerged in response to all of that. Even in the West, by the end of the Second War in 1945, it became very clear that society could not be managed with the sole doctrine of laissez-faire capitalism. There must be state intervention, and so you have Keynesian ideas dominating everywhere. The state must invest in education, must invest in healthcare, must provide social security, must give fair wages to workers. You know, what is called the social contract, or the social compact between workers and the organizations, the big bosses, and big elite interests. There was a general awareness that the tragedy of the Second World War happened because everything was left to laissez-faire, free market, profit questing class, that ran the entire humanity into the crisis of the world wars. So there was a general awareness of that. Whatever your ideological orientation, you knew that, look, we can't continue this way. And so there was a lot of improvement, progressive improvement generally, globally. And it also provided the environment for even the emergence of our Awolowos, you know, the Nkrumahs and so on and so forth, who bought into the welfareist, prevailing welfareist ideologies of the post-Second World War era, free education, free health, and all of that, infrastructural development, massive infrastructural development, and so on and so forth. But with the emergence of neoliberalism, capitalism, they simply say we have given too much. The only way we're going to overcome the crisis of, which was actually a symptom of the periodic cyclical crisis that capitalism also witnessed, always undergo. You know. So there was a little crisis, you know, around foreign reserve and so on and so forth there, and they felt the only way they could do was to roll back everything. We have given too much to working people, so there's no more. Why should people have pensions? So this big pension we pay out to workers, after that is not necessary. Labor market needs to be flexible. Capital must be able to move across borders. You know, you can outsource and all of that. So you had a lot of that under Clinton. So you had huge export of capital, trying to exploit cheap labor all over the world. And good for the Chinese, they were able to take maximum advantage of that. They were able to attract a lot of technological know-how because the Americans were able, they were ready to go to even the satanic communist China because labor was cheap, highly educated, the political system was stable, the social system was stable, so they could go and sink in money there and they'll be sure of their, you know, dividends. Whereas the average worker in America will earn maybe $50 per hour. A more qualified worker in China is ready to take $5 per hour. So everybody rushed to China, and the rest they say is history. So that was the climate. Break down the barriers. There should be no control. Labor should be able, capital should be able to move anywhere. Take advantage, free markets, comparative advantage. So these are the terms being, and of course we also had a whole generation of young people, children of Nigerian elite who are trained in Western colleges, the London School of Economics, and Harvard. They came back with their MBAs and became the bank managers, and you know, they also became prominent managers of the bureaucracies, and it was, yes, I mean, I was listening to El-Rufai talking to during the Obasanjo period, and there was a strike, and so he had this open air interface. He was the minister of the FCT then. So the trade union guy was saying, no, you can't do that, you can't outsource. You want to outsource almost half of the workforce in FCT to labor contractors. These are bloody capitalists. El-Rufai laughed and said, look, Mr. Man, you have to come alive. You are still in the you are still living in the past. What do you mean capitalist? But that's it now. I mean, you have to record. That's the reality of our world. That's what we are in now. You outsource. You know, if you want to do the work, you do it. If you are not ready, you leave it at whatever terms. Of course, the guy is there to make his money, and so on. So the brazen arrogance with which they come, and all of that. So that became the dominant. So ideas around outsourcing, labor flexibilization, contract staffing became standard wisdom, conventional management practice. If you are not into it, you are living in a fool's paradise. In fact, you are still living in the past, and so on. So I did a field work for industry or it's a global union federation bringing together workers in the energy sector, oil and gas, steel and engineering and all of that. So they were interested in Shell. So I was in the Niger Delta in the last quarter of last year, and even January, up to January this year, interview a whole lot of workers, and honestly, gentlemen, it's horrible. Everything is outsourced. 99.9% of workers with Shell are outsourced.
I think it is quite important for people to be able to trace these miseries directly to capitalist expansion.
So what does it mean? So it means all those Shell workers who used to, they were the elite. If you were in Shell in those days, you are a big man. You are working in oil and gas. You are a big man. Because the pay was very good, the conditions were very good. You were entitled to free Medicare. You were entitled to very, very reasonable severance benefits and so on and so forth. But from the 90s, if you read that report, it's almost like a case study of capitalist ideas in this part of the world. So we're supposed to have a Ministry of Labor that is supposed to represent Nigerian interests in these companies. But even the ministry is useless, as Shell literally roll back everything. So Shell is no longer responsible for your healthcare work, irrespective of your level, whether you are management cadre, whether you are a gardener or whatever. Shell, very few workers, maybe 2%, 2 out of 100, can claim to be Shell staff. Because if you are working in any of their sites, you must have come in through one labor contractor or the other. Sometimes you even have layers. So you have a labor contractor, responsible for your pay.
So that's intermediary between the surplus you generate.
And that's the guy that actually interface with you, is your employer, not Shell. So if you have any problem, it's the only one you can meet. So I even, by the time I was discussing with the workers in Lagos here, I have a situation where it even got to a situation where even labor contractor is saying, if you people want to go on strike, you better go on strike. Shell has not renewed the contract with me for the past 10 years. So how can I even give you any increment? So, the thing is not even profitable anymore. And that's a contractor talking, And so they are able to, and when you look at the profile, the kind of profits they make, that's shot up so exponentially.
That's benefits for investors,
shareholders,
at the expense of labor,
managers,
and the owners of the resources,
and so on and so forth. At the expense of the working people. So you have aggregate remuneration, wages, salaries package diminished by over 90%. Diminished by over 90%. Because you look at a Shell an engineer working in a Shell outpost, and it's on contract. He does the work for 8 months, then they ask him to go because the work is seasonal. So then when they need him again, they can, or they simply take somebody else. But there are so many people who can do it anyway. So when you look at what he earns in those 8 months, and you look at what an engineer of his status earned 20 years ago, doing the same thing in the same company, In fact, there's no way you can compare it. You know, so that's the level of degradation we are, and it's not peculiar to the oil and gas. Even in the banks, most of the departments are outsourced, from security, even the tellers. You know, most of those pretty young women you see, as they are on contract. You know.